Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. Meat Eater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the Engineer's going to be there. Meat Eater Live headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay, every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Art Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.
You're listening to the Sportsman's Nation Podcast Network, brought to you by Lacrosse Boots. Now, if you haven't heard yet, this is me telling you, you need to take a look at the new boots from Lacrosse, and they fall under the Navigator series. Now, what they've done is they've taken the best parts of a rubber boot and the best parts of your traditional hiking and hunting boot, and they've mashed them together to come up with this new line of boots from Lacrosse, and that is the Navigator series. Now, they have the women's Windrose, they have the men's Windrose, and then they have the Atlas series within that as well. So go to lacrossefootwear.com and check out this new line of boots that they have. I've been using mine for a couple weeks now, and I am very impressed with the fit and the feel, and I can't wait to get them in the woods this hunting season and give them a trial run. So lacrossefootwear.com, check them out.
My name is Clay Newcomb, and I'm the host of the Bear Hunting Magazine podcast. I'll also be your host into the world of hunting the icon of North American wilderness, the bear. We'll talk about tactics, gear, conservation, but we'll also bring you into some of the wildest country on the planet, chasing bear. This episode of the Bear Hunting Magazine podcast, I am at the Arkansas Game and Fish Regional Headquarters in Fort Smith, Arkansas, with my friend Myron Means. Myron Means is the large carnivore biologist with the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission. We talk a lot about that. We talk about bears. We nerd out about biology. We talk about the history of bears in Arkansas. And Myron has, well, the most unique perspective in this part of the country on bears, because he's been working with them for most of his career. One thing that we did not get into, which I regret that we didn't, is that formerly Myron was known as the bear biologist, the lead bear biologist in Arkansas. They changed his title to the large carnivore biologist, because what other carnivore could we have that he would have oversight over in the state of Arkansas? The answer to that question, young men, is mountain lions. We actually have had enough legitimate sightings of mountain lions in Arkansas that the Game and Fish had to give them a hat tip. We actually have somebody in charge of mountain lions in Arkansas, and that's Myron. But we didn't talk about it. We got so sidetracked by bears that we never talked about it. And there's just been a handful, well, not just a handful. Every year there are confirmed sightings of mountain lions, and that's going to be for another podcast. But you're going to learn something for sure on this podcast, and me and Myron have just a great conversation. I want to draw your attention to our good friends at the Western Bear Foundation. These guys are a nonprofit hunting conservation organization, being a voice for bear hunters out west. I was just on their Facebook page, And they're a great resource for just all the information revolving the delisting and the listing of grizzlies in the greater Yellowstone region. They've got a post on there right now about how one of the top U.S. officials with the Fish and Wildlife Service has made a statement that the grizzly bear is recovered and relisting is a waste of resources, quote unquote. I'm reading this right off of their Facebook page. These guys are a great source for information. Check them out on Instagram and Facebook, our friends at the Western Bear Foundation. Lastly, we just came out with our 5th season of Bear Horizon. So Bear Horizon is our video series where we travel across North America chasing bear and chasing other critters too, whitetails, squirrels, pretty much whatever we can find. But we came out with our 5th DVD, which it's close to 2 hours in length and has at least 8 or 10 episodes. How many episodes we got, Colby? 8 or 10. I'm getting a head nod from Colby. Very cool DVD that you could take with you. Anyway, they're for sale on the Bear Hunting Magazine website, bear-hunting.com. Hey, you're going to enjoy this podcast with my friend and Arkansas Game and Fish, large carnivore biologist Myron Means. Is this a regional office? Fort Smith regional office?
Fort Smith regional office, yeah.
Yeah. Boy, this is a nice facility.
It is. We just finished this about a year ago. So.
Yeah, I hadn't been here. I thought y'all were still over on the river over there. Or
over on the base, yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember where it was.
I think we moved into this office last June. So.
Okay. Well, hey, I'm here with Myron Means, the large carnivore biologist. Is that your official title, Myron?
That is the official title now. Large carnivore program coordinator for Arkansas Game and Fish.
Okay. Well, Myron, you may not remember this. I remember the first time I talked to you.
Yep.
You had just gotten the job at the time as just the Arkansas bear biologist.
That's correct.
And so Rick Eastridge had moved off. You got hired. I think it was 2008.
Yes, it was in the December of 2008, actually, when I officially took the position.
It had to have been right in that time period because I called you and interviewed you, and I had one of the first published articles I ever wrote published in Arkansas Sportsman or some magazine, and I was talking about bears. So I don't remember if I vividly remember that.
I do. I remember. It seems like a lifetime ago, but
so you've been doing this since December 2008.
I've been in this capacity of this position, since the fall of 2008. I'm actually in my 23rd year with Arkansas Game and Fish this year.
Okay.
And oddly enough, I've told people when I do seminars and stuff, I've actually worked with bears in Arkansas longer than I've been employed with Game and Fish.
Okay.
I worked with bears 2 years in undergraduate and graduate work.
Okay.
And
where'd you go to school?
I went to Arkansas Tech for undergraduate work in
Wildlife
Russellville.
biology?
Yeah, wildlife fisheries and wildlife management. And then I went to graduate school at U of A Fayetteville.
Okay. So you were working with bears while you were in college?
That's right.
In the 90s?
Yes.
Yeah.
90, let's see, when was it? 88, 89, and 90.
Did you work with Kim Smith and
Yes.
Joe Clark? Did you really? Now, see, you may have told me that, but I forgot it.
I actually volunteered to work on the Bear Project my first year.
Oh, okay.
I didn't get hired on as a technician, but I wanted to work on the project so much I volunteered, and I drove back and forth from Van Buren to Ozark 2 or 3 times a week just to volunteer and ride along with them.
For a little bit of history for people that wouldn't know, so the first official research project for Arkansas black bears was done in the late 80s, early 90s by Kim Smith and Joe Clark.
That's right.
And that was this is a good divergence into kind of the history of bears, but I want to hear you say it. Our listeners to this podcast hear me talk about Arkansas bears all the time.
Yep.
But
it's worth talking about.
It is. Why don't you lead us up? Because I was going to tell why they were doing the research project. Right. But tell us the 25-year prior history that led to the reason that Kim Smith and these guys that you helped back then.
Right.
So give us an overview.
Well, Arkansas used to be nicknamed the Bear State. I'm sure most of you listeners that are familiar with Arkansas know that we used to be nicknamed the Bear State. And that was with good reason. It was thought at the time of settlement we may have had 50,000 plus black bears in the state. Well, black bears were almost extirpated from the whole state through the 17, 18, and 1900s. And, by the 1920s or so, it was pretty evident that we didn't really have any bears left in the state. And the General Assembly decided to make it illegal to kill a black bear in Arkansas. And, once the Game and Fish was actually kind of coming to their feet about management stuff.
Would that have been in 1927?
Yeah.
When the Game and Fish became an official organization?
Well, I mean, we had our bicentennial celebration, what was it, 3, 4, 5 years ago? I mean, the Game and Fish was actually established I can't
prior to
remember
that.
It was, prior to that, but there really wasn't much to it as an organization, Okay. The organization really didn't kind of get on their feet until the 40s.
Okay.
And, by 1951, there was a guy named Trustin Holder that did a land survey of the state, and his finding was that the only remaining bear population was in the lower White River drainage. And thought we may have had 50 bears left in the state. All the forested areas, the Ozarks and Marsh Talls, had been cut over, for logging and everything else. And Game and Fish embarked on a historical reintroduction effort. Through a 10-year period from 1958 to 1968, they brought 254 bears from Minnesota and Manitoba, Canada, and they released them in sites in the Ozarks and Marsh Talls as a restocking effort.
Brought them down and pickup trucks and wire cages.
Pickup trucks and wire cages and just kicked them out, basically.
I talked to a guy one time that met one of those guys on the road.
Really?
I'm serious. He wasn't even from Arkansas. It was a guy that called in to Bear Hunting Magazine. I still got his information because I wanted to call him back. An old guy called Bear Hunting Magazine. And he told a story of meeting Arkansas Game and Fish officials in the 60s at a gas station. I can't remember where it was like northern Missouri, somewhere between here and Manitoba. And he talked to these guys, and they were like, we're taking these bears back to Arkansas.
Yeah. I have a couple of pictures of those days, a 60-something model pickup truck with a cage on the back of it and 3 bears in the back of it.
Wow.
But, I mean, it was literally just that off the cuff. Minnesota DNR would call us and say, hey, we've got 3 bears for you. Come get them. And, they'd drive up to Minnesota, northern Minnesota, and get them or wherever and bring them back. And, I mean, it was back before the computer age and all that stuff. And, a lot of this reintroduction effort was really just done as just everyday stuff. If it was recorded on anything, it would have been recorded in someone's field journal or field notes, or something like that, which more than likely went with that person when they retired. Right. So there's really not a lot of documentation that took place over this 10-year period.
Do you know who was in charge at that time that would have said, let's do this?
I believe it was Andrew Hulsey. He would have been the director. If it was prior to Andrew Hulsey, I know he was the director when we brought the elk back in, and that was in the 70s. And it might have been Hulsey. It could have been someone before then. It was so far before my time, I'm not really sure.
Yeah, sure.
I know that, when they did reopen bear season in 1980, I believe Steve Wilson was our director.
Yeah.
So,
right.
that's... I mean, the forests were growing back up during that reintroduction effort. It was really prime habitat. There was no season on them. You couldn't harvest them. And, I mean, those bear populations in the Ozarks and Ouachita's, they really just flourished. I mean, there was a lot of clear cut going on in the 70s and 80s that provided just a tremendous amount of food in the summer. And then, of course, you always had the, the hardwood areas in the Ouachita's and the Ozarks that provided all the fall mass. Yeah. So, I mean, really, it was just unlimited food.
And that was a big part of the reintroduction, is that the forest had regenerated from the peak of the forestry harvest, which would have been around the turn of the century. But that's what I've read. I mean,
right,
they were
at the time of settlement.
They clear cut about everything.
Yeah, it was. And I mean, the oak lumber went all over the world. I mean, but those forests had time to get some age back on them. And I mean, really, it was really prime habitat. I mean, there was a lot of controversy on the clear cuttings back in the 70s and 80s and all that. But, really, that's probably one of the single most important factors.
Right. Is
that
the
allowed
habitat
that bear
was ready.
population to just boom.
Yeah. Do you recall, I recall 2 of the locations they released bears. They released them in 3 locations, one in the Ouachita's in Dry Creek.
Yep.
Dry Creek Wilderness.
Yep.
And then the other one was on
Black Mountain.
Which
is now White Rock WMA.
Okay. And the third one, I can't remember where the third one was.
The third one, I believe, was over on Piney Creek's WMA.
Okay. So those for those would be 75, 80 miles apart. I don't know.
Roughly, yeah. Something
so I mean, kind of like 3, and that was just like the best places that they could figure that they could turn them loose.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, who knows whether they all got released in the same spot? Like I say, there wasn't a lot of documentation. I mean, if you'd just driven 30 hours on a round trip, it was in the middle of the
you
night.
might have just dropped the tailgate.
You may have just dropped the tailgate and kicked them out. Yeah. So, they dispersed out where they needed to be. And, as I say, the population really just boomed. I'm sure reproduction was at its peak. Our average litter size now is roughly 2 cubs per litter. That wouldn't surprise me at all if we didn't see a lot of 3 and 4 cub litters back in those days.
Is that because they somehow biologically would have sensed that they were inside of a stressed population and needed to reproduce more? Like why?
Well, just inside of an open population. I mean, there's no restrictions on density-dependent issues. It's just unlimited food and unlimited range, and
so that would translate into bigger litter sizes.
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah. So that brings us back to your work when you were in the late 80s. So finally, after 25 years or 20-something years, they said, hey, these bears are dispersing. There have been no scientific data gathered.
No, there really hadn't, other than the fact that we just knew we were getting some bears. We knew we were getting a lot of bears.
And so they opened up a season in 80, and then in like 1988, they said, hey, we better figure out how many bears we've actually got. Is that about right?
That's pretty well it. I mean, there'd been enough work on establishing population estimates through mark recaptures efforts and things like that, and they were getting pretty good at it. And but really, I mean, that's what prompted Game and Fish to initiate a study. They worked on it in the Ozarks for a couple of years, and then the Ouachita's a couple of years, and it was basically a hard mark recapture study to give us baseline population.
So they had collared bears. That
they did have collared bears,
telemetry.
Males and females that they were, doing home range estimates on. They were doing reproduction estimates, recruitment estimates on the females, the same stuff that we're still doing today. And it was really just kind of the whole ball of wax. It was population estimation. It was home range estimation. It was reproduction, recruitment, or survival. It was just really everything that we didn't know about our bear population all rolled into one. And it ended up being, the information was good enough and sound enough that it lasted us, 20 years.
Yeah.
And we were able to kind of glean off of that and, make a little bit of assumptions outside it, in the latter part of that 20 years. So that's what I got started in when I was in undergraduate and graduate school. I was able to be a part of those studies.
So you were just a biologist for the Game and Fish then for a while before 2008 when you became the bear biologist.
Yeah, I was just a field biologist, and actually I actually started in Jonesboro that's when I started my career, and I was in Jonesboro for a year and a half, and then I moved back to the Russellville office, and from that point on, my predecessor Rick Eastridge. The Ozarks was a really, really big part of our bear management or bear population, just like the Ouachita's was. And because almost the entire northwest quarter of the state was in my region, I was kind of the go-to person for that region for bear work.
Okay.
And so back when I moved from 97 to 98, I really didn't do much bear work in Jonesboro. But when I moved back to Russellville in 98, I was a nuisance bear coordinator for all Northwest Arkansas. I was a field biologist and all that. So, had the opportunity to be involved in every facet of the bear program, whether it be nuisance work, whether it be research capturing, whether it be den surveys in the fall, bait station surveys, so.
Let me ask you this, too. So in 1968, we had, less than a couple hundred bears in the state. We'd brought them back in. In 1990, they figured we had 2,500 bears in Arkansas, basically. Yeah. How many do we have now, Myron?
Really, honestly, if you look at the revised population work that AGFC did back in the early 2000s, we found that the end result in the Ouachita or the Ozark study was almost 3 times what the previous density estimate was from the 80s study.
Okay.
In the Ouachita's, it was almost double what the previous estimate was. So if you kind of take that information with a little bit of a grain of salt, understanding that the methods applied in the early 2000s were probably a lot more accurate than the methods that we applied in the late 80s.
Okay.
Late 80s, they were doing snares and ear tags and actual mark and recapture. In the 2000, we're doing DNA analysis off hair traps.
Okay.
And so can you say, well, if we thought we had 2,500 then, do we have 4 times that now? Well, probably not that much. It's probably a little bit of the fact that, yes, we no doubt have more bears now. Do we have 3 times the amount of bears? Maybe. I mean, it's not an exact science.
Yeah.
So you have to take a little bit of there's a little bit of, I guess, factoring that goes into it.
Sure.
I think based on the information that we had, 15 years ago or 12 years ago now, I think we've probably have somewhere in the neighborhood of 6,000 plus bears statewide.
Okay.
I mean, we obviously have bear populations in the Ozarks and Ouachita's that continue to expand.
Yeah.
Oklahoma continues to get more and more bears, bears dispersing into Oklahoma. Our Gulf Coastal Plain of the state continues to get more bears as bears dispersing out the Ouachita's and Felsenthal and places like that.
What percentage of Arkansas would you say has bears right now? Do you have any idea?
70%.
70% of the counties in Arkansas would have had bear sightings?
70% of the land coverage of the
mass?
state. Yeah,
okay.
Arkansas has 75 counties, and I'm going to say there's probably 60 counties in the state.
Okay, so even a higher percentage of actual counties.
Yeah.
See, that seems like, heck, when I was a kid growing up in the Ouachita's, there weren't bears. Like I knew, just as a kid, where the line was where there weren't bears anymore. Because we deer hunted an hour south of Mena.
Exactly.
And there were no bears down there.
Nope.
You'd never see a bear down there. Never hear of a bear. People talked about, oh, wow, you guys are from up there. You got bears up there. And then now there's bears down there just as much as there were bears.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I've seen the same thing up in the north part of the state. I mean, I've lived in western Arkansas all my life, and I grew up hunting the Ozarks and hunting White Rock and hunting WMAs like that. Those parts of the national forest.
Yeah.
And I can remember, you know, as a teenager, even as an adult, and even as a biologist with game and fish, there was forever in a time to where the major north-south corridor in the western part of Arkansas is I-49.
Right.
That goes from Fort Smith to Fayetteville.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the previous corridor was Highway 71, which it runs parallel to, but you know, it was further on in my career before you would even ever hear of a bear being west of Highway 71 or west of I-49 corridor.
Yes.
And now, you know, that part of between the I-49 corridor and the Oklahoma state line, it's just lousy with bears.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. Yeah. There are a lot of bears. Yeah. And even in northeast Oklahoma, you know, in some of their public land areas like Cherokee, Cookson, and all that, I mean, there's getting to be a pretty substantial bear population.
Yeah. And we, on this podcast, too, we've talked a lot about Oklahoma because I hunt over there. But, I mean, their bears came from our reintroduction. Now, they would have that totally would have been in the bears' historic range. So bears were in Oklahoma.
Absolutely. And Missouri's seeing the same thing. South Central Missouri, they're getting bears as a result of Arkansas bears dispersing. Yeah.
So you know, if you looked at North America ecologically and you saw what was happening, the best way that I could describe it is whatever is happening seems to be beneficial to black bears.
Well, you know, it really is. And
what is it?
I'll give you a prime example of it. Our Gulf Coastal Plain in the state is really a prime example of how the culture is benefiting the bear population.
Okay.
You know, and this is strictly just observation on my part as a biologist and working with bears in Arkansas for 20 plus years. You know, historically in the Gulf Coastal Plain of the state, and when I'm talking about the Gulf Coastal Plain, if you just basically took a tip of a triangle being Little Rock and you drew a corner to the southeast part of the state and a leg to the southwest part of the state, that's essentially the Gulf Coastal Plain of Arkansas. And, you know, if you look back, say, you know, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, it was primarily all timber company land. You know, it had plenty of soft mast available. There's probably enough hard mast available, you know, throughout certain regions of that state that could have sustained a bear population. But we just never really saw bears pull into it until probably 20 years ago. And the thing that started happening culturally 20 years ago was, you know, a lot of the way people hunt changed, you know, 20, 30 years ago. And it really started kind of evolving into a, you know, more of a food plot / feeder type hunting style rather than a go out and still hunt, you know.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that, you know, I know. I mean, I can't prove it, but I know looking at how that bear population has evolved over the past 20 plus years, I have no doubt in my mind what that has done is because you have people feeding on a landscape level.
Year round
On a landscape level. And this has been a cultural deal that's just kind of
You think we baited them down in there?
I don't know if we necessarily bait. I don't know if that would be an accurate
I'm joking, but I'm with you.
But what that has done, because culture has moved to that style of hunting, bears have indirectly benefited from it because what it has done is provided a annual food supply.
Yes.
And it has taken submarginal habitat and turned it into marginal or even moderate bear habitat.
Yeah.
Because, you know, bears can adapt to any forested type
Yeah.
They don't have to have crevices to have dens and reproduction. They can do it right on top of the ground. There's no flooding regime. Where there is flooding, they have adapted to denning in tree cavities.
Yeah.
Like in the lower White River, Bio-Bartholomew area. So on the upland areas, you have taken an area that would have probably been void of food through most of the fall. And it just wouldn't have been suitable
because
habitat.
It's all pine. And a lot of people wouldn't know it. I mean, all that pine, when you say
it's all pine,
it's
all timber company. Timber companies didn't manage land for hardwood. There were always enough hardwood strips around through there to provide
along the creeks. They had a riparian buffer along these creeks. That's the way that world works down there. Is there'd be small strips of hardwoods along creeks and then big plantations.
They have, all these timber companies have always done, but in the last several decades, they've done best management practices. They don't cut timber all the way up, so they had riparian stream, I forget what it's called, stream side riparian zones or something like that. But anyway, they left the hardwoods along the creeks.
Yeah.
And so, that provided a little bit of hard mass to get through the fall. And because these were typically clear-cut operations, there was always plenty of hard mass or soft mass in the summer. Yeah. Soft mass more than likely wasn't the limiting factor.
Yes.
It was the fall food source that was the limiting factor through most of that part of the world.
And now we've given it to them through bait and deer.
That's right.
I'll be darned.
So
would that area ever be that was good to hear you say that, because I've thought about this, that being like subpar habitat, which the difference between that and the Ozarks and Ouachitas would be mature climax hardwood forest through national forest that's not being cut very much anymore. What, Myron, would that, they're like, I was in Michigan a couple years ago, and they don't hardly have much hard mast in a lot of areas, a lot of big pines and pine areas and timber areas, and bears do fine there. Would that Gulf Coastal Plain ever, would those bears ever adapt to where that is prime habitat even without bait and deer? I don't know if that's a good question, really.
My opinion of it would, it may be able to support a very, very small, limited
They got to have that fall.
They've got to have it. That's the fall forage is really, that's what they use to fatten up, that's what the females have to have in order to get their bodies in a condition to go through and complete a gestation period, go into a den cycle for 4 to 5 months, complete a gestation.
Projects them into the fall and into their major cycles.
They have to have that. And without that, the males wouldn't necessarily have to have it, but the female segment of that population has to have that going into the fall. Otherwise, you're not going to have decent reproductive rates. You're going to have extremely poor reproductive rates. You're probably going to have extremely poor recruitment rates.
Okay.
And it reverts back to that submarginal habitat. Because, really, in the fall, when there's a very limited food available, the males are going to dominate those food supplies. The dominant males are.
Right.
So they don't care if the female gets any food or not. For them, it's survival of the fittest. So if there's one little oak patch there that's dropping acorns, guess what? Guess who's going to own it?
He's going to get it.
He's going to own it. So
what kind of recruitment? So with this added human cultural element, like what kind of recruitment? And that's one of the studies that you guys have been doing the last several years.
Yes, we have an ongoing study that should have completed its second field season this year. Unfortunately, we got flooded out. That part of the world does flood frequently from the White River system. And the first year of our study was supposed to have been 2 years ago. The first year of the field season got flooded out because half of our hair snare sites were underwater.
That's no good.
Then last year we were able to complete a field season. We were supposed to finish our second field season this summer. We got flooded out again. So right now the projection is to finish our second field season next summer. And once the second field season is completed, within the next year, we should have enough information to go ahead and start putting a season framework together. With a little bit of hesitation, I'll make the projection that I'm hoping that we can see some type of season framework in the year 2022 for the Gulf Coastal Plain.
So that would bring us to 4 areas that we have.
Well, that's actually right now we have Bear Zone 1 and Bear Zone 2, which is the Ozarks and Ouachita mountain regions.
And that's
of the
our
state.
big. That's our.
Those are the big areas.
Yeah,
and then we also have Bear Zone 5 and 5A, which is basically around the White River Refuge.
It has a very limited hunt.
Very limited hunt. Very limited opportunity. And then the Gulf Coastal Plain right now consists of basically Bear Zone 3 and Bear Zone 4.
Okay.
So, hopefully within my career time frame, hopefully within the next 4 to 5 years, we'll have a bear season over. There's only 7 bear zones, so 6 and Bear Zone 6 and 7 are really up in the northeast part of the state and the Delta, and I don't ever foresee having a bear season in that part of the world.
Yeah, it's just not bear habitat.
But really, in every other bear zone in the state, hopefully by 2022, we'll have some type of season structure in place.
Do you have any idea how many bears are in the Gulf Coastal Plain?
We don't right now. We do know that we have population. We do know that we've seen we have some collared females in the Gulf Coastal Plain. We've seen evidence of reproduction. We know that females are dispersed across the Gulf Coastal Plain.
Yeah.
We have citizen science evidence of that. We have a site on iNaturalist. If you live in that part of the world or hunt or have land or lease land in that part of the world, we have an Arkansas Black Bear Survey where people can log on to that, create a logon name, and they can actually download pictures on iNaturalist on the Arkansas Black Bear Survey. And it'll give us citizen science information.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
And, we do use that information. We do use it. We do look at it. And in a large part of that state, that's really the only means of reproduction information we can have on it, because it's all
cubs.
private.
Yeah.
And, we can't just willy-nilly go out and do these big research projects on a bunch of private land.
Yeah.
So that is one of our big limiting factors of being able to obtain data in that part of the world. It's hard to do.
Yeah.
But we do know there's reproduction in that part of the state. I have, just from what I've seen, I think we have fairly low bear densities in that part of the state relative to the other areas of the state. But I think we'll see through the research effort. I think we'll see that we do have a large enough population. I think we have a high enough reproductive rate that we'll definitely be able to have some type of season framework.
Yeah. Well, that's exciting. And that's a win for conservation when your bears are spreading enough.
It really is. I mean, when you look at Arkansas's history, just over the last 38 years, when we opened bear season, you think, well, back then it was just the Ozarks and the Ouachitas, and now, you're talking about, 40 years later, having a bear season over virtually every part of the state that isn't just Delta Agri.
Yeah.
So it's pretty remarkable.
It really is.
That reintroduction effort that Arkansas embarked on in the 50s and 60s is, and I tell everybody this, it's still to this day, it's the most successful reintroduction of a large carnivore in history.
Yeah.
Not just here, in the U.S., but anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
It is a true poster child what good conservation strategies can do.
Yeah.
So
it's incredible. Do you think? What do you think? Do you think the bear is on the? Where's the bear at in terms of the commission's level of attention? Is that a fair question?
Oh, I think it is. It certainly ranks up there in the top 2 or 3.
Okay.
Deer's deer. Deer's king in any state.
Yeah.
And Arkansas is really no different. I mean, deer is king in Arkansas. When you're talking about game species and all that stuff, whether it'll run a second to deer as opposed to turkey, I don't really know. Unfortunately, we don't really have a system, a licensed system in Arkansas that allows us to, cherry pick how many bear hunters we have in the state.
We don't really know.
I wish we really did.
Yeah.
And maybe someday we will.
Yeah.
But right now, our license system really doesn't allow
everybody
us to,
that has a resident Arkansas sportsman's license for $25 has a bear tag.
That's right. Yeah. And even out of state, hunters, if they come in, if they're hunting deer, they have to buy the big game license.
Yeah.
So when you buy the non-resident big game, then you get a bear tag. So, we have no way of knowing whether or not the residents and the non-residents, whether they're coming in to bear hunt, whether they're coming in to deer hunt.
Yeah.
Our license system just isn't set up for us to be able to pull that information off of it. But
let me ask you a couple of questions about the Ozarks and Ouachita's and bear densities. I've always been curious about, and I've seen some of the data, but I wonder if you had any new data of actual take the best habitat in Arkansas, and we don't have to tell them where it is. Me and you both know where it is. The best bear habitat in Arkansas. What is a bear density per square mile? And I know it's not, bear home ranges overlap. I mean, I have people ask me this question, and it's hard to describe because, bear home ranges overlap. So if you just drew a square mile, you said, how many bears are there right now? Well, maybe right now there's no bears there. But over the course of a year, there might be 10 bears that cross through that square mile.
Yeah.
But, how would a biologist describe bear densities?
Well, the population estimates that we get from our research will always equate it to square kilometers or 100 square kilometers, and it's hard. It's really hard to kind of, give a person a good feel of a bear density when you say, well, we have 2.5 bears per 100 square kilometers.
If we were
or something
French,
like
maybe we'd understand that.
Or something like that.
We need to speak some Arkansas redneck here.
Yeah, man, converting it to square miles.
Or some unit that would make sense,
If you take something like White Rock WMA, which is part of the Ozark National Forest. It's 250,000 acres roughly.
Okay.
And you say, how many bears do we have on White Rock WMA?
Yeah.
Or at least utilize a part of White Rock WMA? Would it be a fair assessment to say maybe there were 200 or 300 bears scattered across White Rock WMA? It's probably pretty fair assessment.
Yeah.
When you're talking about densities, it's just one of those things. You can have localized, very high densities.
Because of habitat.
And then, a few miles away from that, you may not have any bears in that part of the world.
Yeah.
So, when you spread it all the way across like Bear Zone 1, which is basically the Ozarks, we think that we may have 3,000 bears plus across the Ozarks.
Yeah.
I think that's a fair assessment of our population, what we have going on right now. And really when you're calculating densities, you're really just calculating densities from that study area, extrapolating that over a bigger area.
So you take a controlled area that you can really understand.
Like White Rock. When they did the population work on White Rock in the late, 2006 to 2009, something like that.
And then, so you say, well, we pretty much have a good idea of how many bears are in this. And then you say, well, how much more habitat do we have that's like that across the state? And so really, when you get a population study, it's not like they went to every county and did
Oh,
this.
no. It's far, far from an exact science.
Yeah.
I mean, you can take some of the variables out of it with the technology that we have now. You can do habitat rankings, and you say, okay, this White Rock has a habitat ranking of this.
So it's really
and with
good
GIS,
habitat.
You can say, okay, where else do we have habitat that ranks this?
Right.
And if this habitat ranks, it is by no means an exact science. There is a lot of swagging that goes on.
Let me ask it to you this way. This will be like a true or false question here. If you were standing in White Rock and you had a bow in your hand and you were fixing to dive off into one of those big hollows there, could you say in the fall of the year there's probably 3 bears in the square mile?
I think that'd be probably safe.
Okay. Yeah. Would there be 6?
Maybe a couple.
Okay. So that's true. Your answer is true.
Mm-hmm.
True or false? There are 6 bears in the square mile.
Probably not.
Okay, false. Okay, so yeah. That's what I think about, Myron, when I'm bear hunting in National Forest. Get out of the truck.
I always kind of envision this. I'm sitting there looking up this huge drain, and I'm thinking, boy, if I had one red dot appear everywhere there was a bear. That's to me, that's what I think of densities. That'd give me an idea of density. But yeah, if you're talking a square, I would say a square mile anywhere on White Rock because it is optimum habitat. It is national forest. I'd say there's a real good chance that within any given square mile on White Rock, you could have 2 to 3 bears.
Yeah, I'd say that's good. I think that kind of gives a picture of the density, which if you think about it from a deer perspective, like coming from deer hunting, I mean, a bear is a low-density animal compared to a deer. So, I mean, that's now, obviously there's not a lot of deer in White Rock because it's closed canopy forest, but, there might be 15 deer, 10 deer in that square mile.
Yeah, and the other thing to consider with bear is, they may show up in that square mile, but one of those bears may show up in the square mile next to it as well.
Right.
So to say that there's 3 bears that live in that square mile,
they don't.
No, they don't. They have their ranges are way too
extensive. Talk to me about
bear
home ranges for Arkansas, because I've seen data from all over the country about in places where resources are sparse, like out west, these bears have these bigger home ranges because they're having to travel more.
Right.
But where resource is plentiful, with eastern deciduous forest, pretty much is bear prime time habitat.
Yeah.
What are bear densities here, or bear home ranges?
Home ranges, I'm going to say your typical home range in the Ozarks or Ouachita's for an adult female is probably going to be maybe 5 or 6 square miles.
Okay.
And realize that, and I tell people that the way to think about a home range of a bear is really kind of like this. That doesn't mean that they're the only bears that occupy that home range. And I tell people just equate it to an individual owning 40 acres. If you own 40 acres and have a house and a yard on that 40 acres, every once in a while, you may go over to the back 40 and you may kind of check it out. You may have a pond on the east side that you go fish. You may have this or whatever. But you primarily live in your house and in your yard.
Yeah.
And that's a territory. And bears will have established territories within a home range.
Okay.
They may have a summer territory where they typically forage in the summer. They may have a fall territory where they typically forage in the fall. Sometimes those places are right next to each other. Sometimes they may be 2 miles apart. So with bears, you have a lot of home range, and that 40 acres is basically all the resources they have available.
It's where they would go in a given year. Is that right?
Right.
I
where
mean,
they
like
could
the
go
furthest
in a given
extent
year.
Of where they would go.
If they had to go to the back corner of the 40 to get a drink, if they had to go to the front 40 corner of the 40 to go to a berry patch that was ripe, or the bottom corner to get a cherry bench that was loaded with cherries. It's basically all the land that bear can potentially go to have access to food during the year.
And that home range could be overlapped by multiple other
absolutely.
bears. So
absolutely. And people tend to think of, I tell them White Rock's 250,000 acres. Well, an adult female's home range is 4, 5, 6 square miles. Wow. There's only 5 bears on White Rock.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's not like that at all. You have several adult female home ranges that overlap. Right. You have multiple adult male ranges that overlap themselves and overlap multiple female ranges.
What about males?
They're probably going to be at least half again bigger.
Okay.
Maybe 10 square miles. And where you will most see home range, quote, home range activity come into play is during the mating season.
Yeah.
Those males will probably hit all 4 corners of their home range looking for those females.
Now, you still get some wild ones that disperse really big.
Sure.
I mean, we talked about the bear that went 156 miles into Oklahoma and got killed on the interstate back in the 90s or whenever.
Yeah. And, it's not just the young bears. I mean, typically it is the subadult male bears that can disperse hundreds of miles. But, we've had females with collars on them just pack up and move. And it doesn't happen very often. But for some reason or another, they just pack up and move.
Yeah.
But
what's the wildest bear movement story that you've come across in 20 years in Arkansas? Can you think of one?
I know we had one of our collared females show up a couple of years ago up on the Mingo National Wildlife Refuge in southeast Missouri.
Okay.
I mean, at the time, Missouri hadn't even started their project. And it was several months after the fact. But anyway, I ended up getting in contact with someone that had a photo or someone that had seen a cinnamon bear on Mingo that had an orange radio tracking collar on it.
How far did she go?
We don't know. We were never able to get a hold of her. I was never even able to
Where
figure
was
out
she collared?
Who knows?
I mean,
she was collared by us in Arkansas.
Oh, so you don't even
somewhere.
know. You don't even know who she was.
I don't even know which female it was.
Because I guess some of them go missing.
Yeah, some of them go missing. A collar will go missing. Whether they're poached or whether it goes dead or malfunction. Something happened to it, and you have collars just disappear. I was never able to glean back through. I mean, there was no doubt when the bear was seen, the only state around within
it was your
500-mile area was using orange radio collars.
Yeah.
I mean, it was obvious it was one of our collared bears. Now, whether that bear was collared in the Ouachita's, the Ozarks, who knows? But it was collared in Arkansas, and we still to this day have no idea which bear it was or where she ended up at.
So she may have come back. I mean, she
may have.
She may be here now. We don't know.
I see. So... But, I mean, when the collars have a limited range, it's if it was a satellite collar, it would have been different. But we've never used satellite collars.
So we harvest about less than 500 bears a year in Arkansas. Is that about right?
Yeah.
300. What's the quota in the Ozarks this year?
250 for archery and then 45 muzzleloader, 45 modern gun.
So we could kill as many as 350. Something.
Yeah.
340. 340 bears.
Yep.
Which maybe we will. I mean, most of the time we would get pretty close to that, wouldn't we?
Most of the time we do.
Harder.
I mean, even in years where there is good mast available, it usually trickles through enough. I think, a couple of years ago, you shot one on the last day of
Very
season.
last day, November 30th.
I mean, it'll just kind of trickle through depending on what the mass availability is like. If it's a really poor mass year, we're going to meet the quota.
Yeah,
with
and then the Ouachita's, they'll kill 100 to 130.
Something like that. Probably 100 to 150. Probably. Okay. Yeah.
So there's potential of 500 bears, and they'll kill 10 down in zones 5 and 5A.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the scope of our our bear harvest here in Arkansas.
Yeah, and we're really looking to increase that. I mean, for a long time there, after the early 2000s study came out, we knew we had more bears than we thought. Reproduction rates we saw in 2007, 8, and 9. We thought we saw those drop. Well, we did see them drop dramatically because of some environmental things, and I actually thought that we would have seen some pretty far-reaching effects of that, and it turns out that it wasn't. It wasn't near as dramatic effect as we thought.
I think it'd be interesting to talk about that just for a second.
Sure.
In that was a spring when there was total leaf out, and I don't remember all the dates, but I just want to.
It was Easter weekend of 2007.
So all the oaks had their tassels out.
Yep.
I mean, full leaf out, and then we had a massive freeze.
Yep, about 2/3 of the state.
It was almost like Halloween, Myron. I mean, you remember it too. I mean, it was like
everything
all
was
this
black.
green, and then everything went black.
Yeah.
I mean, it was almost otherworldly, and so it killed all the mast crop, killed even some of the soft mast.
It killed all the soft mast. It killed all the hard mast.
And so you knew that was going to. Well, yeah. I mean, the projection was that was going to massively impact reproduction.
It was, and at that time we had actually removed the quota in Zone 1 because if people were barely meeting the quota, even on years when there wasn't mast available, when the bears were susceptible to harvest over bait, we were still really barely meeting our quota.
Yeah.
And so what happened as a result of that was we knew it was going to impact reproduction. We knew it was going to impact survival rates, but we didn't start seeing that, of course, until 2008 and 2009 because bears have a 2-year reproductive cycle.
Right.
And, after 2009, after that data came in, we realized, we went from having 85% reproductive rates to 30% reproductive rates.
Right.
We went from having 80 to 90% survival or recruitment rates down to 25% survival rates. It was just hard. And, we saw that coming and we thought, well, we have got to reinstate the quota. So in 2010, we reinstated the quota to provide a cushion on that.
Yeah.
And, of course, almost a decade later, I can look back at the dispersal information, at just the information we have on bears showing up in parts of the state where we just haven't had bears before.
Yeah.
And especially females with cubs showing up in areas that were, really fringes of bear range before. And looking back on it, I can say with pretty good confidence, I thought it was going to be a major impact to the population, and it turned out it wasn't even a speed bump.
Wow. It's incredible how they can adapt and
it really is.
Back.
And, some of the things that may have softened the blow is the same effect that's taking place in the Gulf Coastal Plain is more than likely taking place across Bear Range 1 as well, feeding on the landscape level, deer feeders and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, outside of that,
maybe it
that impact may have been a lot more prevalent.
Yeah.
But at any rate, the end result is still the same. We still feel like we have expanding bear populations in the Ozarks, in the Ouachitals. And right now, our current statewide bear plan dictates that we are trying to stabilize those populations. So, ideally what we want to do is we want to harvest those bear populations at roughly the same rate of reproduction.
Right.
And so if instead of having 10 or 12% reproductive rate, maybe we're having 15, 18%.
Wow. That's good news for bears.
Well, I guess that's a misstatement. Instead of adding 10% to your bear population, in a given year, or 12%, maybe we're adding 15 or 18% to our population.
Yeah.
So what we want to do is increase harvest rates to balance that out.
Yeah.
So, I do know that, for the next regulation cycle, there'll be some proposals. Now, I don't make the laws or the regulations, I propose them. But I do know that I have proposed an increase in the Zone 1 quota. And, there may be, you and I have talked about this for years, going back to some things in Zone 2 that may allow us to harvest more bears.
Yeah.
Zone 2 doesn't have a quota. It's really kind of a self-regulating system, for the lack of a better term. There's really only so many bears in Zone 2 that are going to be accessible to being harvested.
Because of the distribution of private land.
That's exactly right.
Would a September, because we had a September 15th opener for 5 or 6 years, would that be a logistical problem? Because that's what we were talking about.
Well, it wasn't really a logistical problem back then. I think it was more.
I guess the question would just be, if we were trying to harvest bears there, reinstating that, would that be because I know now it's pretty nice that we've got, from a management standpoint, regulations, to have the deer season open with the bear season.
Yeah. And
what could I do? Could I twist your arm to get back our September 15th bear opener?
Those are decisions on those types of things are really made, they're made by our upper administration. They're made by our commissioners. And is it possible that, we could go back to that? Sure, it's possible. Now, whether or not we'll do something as drastic as tagging gun onto the front of it, because really that, those are one of the things that really kind of hurt that early opener. It was so successful that, that's when we really started seeing the spike in females and the harvest rate when we added the gun. So, if we really feel that we need to address population growth in Zone 2, is that something that we could certainly consider? Sure.
Just turn those bow hunters loose, man.
Sure. So believe me, I get asked every year.
Can we have that over? Hey, Myron, I had to say that for my people, because everybody's like, you got to talk to Myron about getting the spec. Yeah. We've talked about it so many times. The only thing that I say from a hunting's perspective is that if we could change the culture in some way, and I think we're doing it, where people are targeting those older, mature males, which that's the ones we want to take out anyway.
Sure.
Boy, it's easier to take them on the 15th than it is later.
Oh, yeah, believe me, I know.
So if you, in a perfect world, if you could say, okay, guys, we'll give you the September 15th opener, you shoot the big ones.
Yeah.
Don't shoot the juveniles and females that come in that are easy. And obviously you can't do that because there's new hunters and there's situations that arise where, you let your kid hunt and you're not going to tell your kid not to shoot a legal bear.
Right.
There's all these variables, but that's the one thing that I've seen is that, boy, for those older, mature males, they're always hard to kill.
Oh, yeah.
But they're easier to kill the earlier for whatever.
There's no doubt.
For whatever reason.
And believe me, nobody's heart's been broke more than mine when I hunt in Zone 1.
Yeah, no doubt.
So I'm susceptible to the regulations of the game and fish just like anybody else.
Yeah.
And, last year was a prime example. I was so excited about it because I thought, wow, we're going to have everybody in our leash. I got 6 guys, and we're going to have everybody. Man, boy, it's just going to be perfect. We could potentially have every one of us have a bear on opening afternoon. And 2 days before, the wind and the rain.
They'll break your heart, man. Those bears will break your heart.
They sure will.
What's the total shift of topics here? What's the biggest Arkansas black bear you've ever laid your hands on in research or legitimately heard of?
Well, I've heard of some 600-pound plus males being harvested that I have physically laid my hands on. I'm going to say a 500-pound male. When we've done research, I've had people tell me they've shot males 500 plus.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that I had one on a bait barrel last year that would have pushed 500.
Mm-hmm. That number is a pretty legitimate number. I mean, like, not everybody has a 500-pound bear, but there's enough that are killed, that are really weighed. They're 500-pound bears for sure.
And the people that I've heard actual weights from, I mean, they went through the effort of weighing them either on really big spring scales or taking their truck over some scales or something. So I feel it's pretty accurate. I mean, if you think back to the reintroduction effort, our bears are descendants of their northern counterparts.
Yeah.
So they naturally are going to have the potential of being a lot bigger framed than our original Arkansas bears would have. Oh, yeah.
Really?
I mean, it's a rule of science called Bergman's rule.
Right.
And it simply states that animals of northern hemispheres have larger biomass than animals of southern hemispheres.
Right. Further you get away from the equator.
Are bigger than, Iowa deer are bigger than Arkansas deer. Minnesota deer are bigger than Arkansas deer.
I always thought that, I've always said that Bergman's law didn't apply to bears because they denned in the winter, so they evaded that law. Because think about North Carolina bears. North Carolina bears are the biggest bears in the world.
Yeah, those coastal bears.
Yeah.
And that's probably due to mostly their diet.
Yeah.
But, I mean, really, I think the rule still applies, to some extent. I just think on average, after bears evolve on a certain food type or certain habitat, I think Bergman's law still applies.
Okay, so that's interesting. I wouldn't have thought that those bears would be bigger framed than ours, so that's why we have some big bears that we do.
Mm-hmm. Huh? I think, it may not be as prominent as something like
deer. It kind of hurts me as an Arkansan, Myron. It kind of hurts me a little bit.
It may not be as prominent as, like on deer, of course. The perfect example is, a Saskatchewan deer versus a Florida key deer.
Right, absolutely.
But I think there's still a certain amount of that law that applies to all animals.
Yeah.
I don't think bears are completely excluded from it.
Yeah. Well, conversation shift again. Before we started talking about a question that you get asked a lot about, which is expansion into a spring season or running hounds.
Mm-hmm.
I want to tee you up for that because I get that question all the time too. People are like, "Hey, why don't we have this? Why don't we have that?"
I do too.
The explanation that you gave to me earlier was a great. I thought it was a great example of why. Actually, the risk inside of that, and I'm not going to say I hadn't decided if I fully agree with it, but it's a good point. So talk to me about that.
Well, I've given I just finished up giving 6 bear hunting seminars all across the state, and it was really just bear hunting A to Z in Arkansas. What to do on public land, what to do on private, and I got asked at every one of those seminars.
Right.
I was asked, do you think Arkansas will ever have a spring season? Do you think Arkansas will ever have a hound season?
Right.
And, the kind of just a short abbreviated response I gave them was probably not. And really, Arkansas is really fortunate in that we are a very sportsman-oriented state.
Yeah.
We have a very, very strong sportsman mentality. Consumptive user of the resource, whether you're a fisherman, whether you're a hunter. But, the consumptive component of the vast majority of our state is very prevalent. And we're very fortunate of that.
Yeah.
And the reason why we are so fortunate about it is we don't really have a lot of backlash from anti-hunting segments of the population.
Right.
Because there are so many sportsmen in Arkansas. There's such a large consumptive component of our state.
Yeah.
It's still pretty rural. A lot of places in the state, most people don't have to go very far at all to go deer hunt.
Yeah.
They may, but they wouldn't necessarily have to
even
go that
people
far
that
to deer
are
hunt.
urban people. The biggest city in Arkansas is roughly 250,000 people. Little Rock.
So
even those people that might be truly urban people that aren't hunters and stuff, they're always, this is my just anecdotal, they're one step away from a hunter.
Yeah,
you know, their uncle was a hunter.
Sure.
Their granddad was a hunter.
Sure.
And so they have some,
and that heritage is,
they have some connection to it.
It really is so steeped in Arkansas's tradition that we're fortunate enough not to have a large anti-hunting component in the state. And you know, some of the cons of having harvest strategies like a hound season or spring season, you know, it's just some of them can carry pretty strong anti-hunting connotations about them. I mean, people hear about a spring season and, you know, maybe they're not necessarily an anti, but if they hear about a spring season orphaning cubs, you know, well, that's just going to leave a bad taste in their mouth. So they may become an anti rather than, and it's just, there's the cons that are associated with some of those practices would really probably outweigh the benefits of us instituting one of those. Primarily because we don't have to institute practices like that in order for us to obtain our harvest objectives.
Right.
And so that's what I usually tell people, and the short answer is, well, probably not, because we're able to harvest enough bears in the state to keep the population healthy and sound without venturing off into those,
right,
for lack of a better term, I'm going to call them sideline harvest strategies, because your primary harvest strategies is always going to be a fall season, you know, on bears. But then you can have a sideline, a spring or a hounds or something like that. And most of the states that have spring seasons need those spring seasons to achieve their harvest objectives.
Right.
Or they need multiple bears in a bag limit, you know, or something like that.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, the true answer is we're able to harvest enough bears in Arkansas without fighting those battles.
I think that's a good PR statement, because people don't understand. And I mean, and I'm all for every legal method that falls into scientific wildlife management to give people opportunity. So in my mind, in a perfect world, guys could run hounds. We'd have a spring season. The perfect world. But the way that you guys think, and this is good, is from a management position. Our job is to extract a certain number of animals from the population every year to achieve our management goals.
That's right.
And the current system facilitates that.
Sure.
And here's another thing about Arkansas that I think is important, is that we don't have a long history of historic use practices, because we didn't have bears in the state for 50 years.
That's right.
For real. Like in the Appalachians, I've been going over there and hunting with some guys with hounds. Incredible culture. Incredible. I mean, those guys are some of the most dedicated sportsmen and best outdoorsmen that I know. They have on their side historic use.
Yes.
Because for 250 years they've been running hounds.
Yep.
And because we didn't have bears, because there were absolutely guys running hounds in Arkansas back in the 1800s. I mean, there's all kind of literature of that. I mean, so like in some ways you could say, well, it is historic use because we've been running. But there was 70 years where people forgot about it. It was lost. Yeah. So that's the difference between us and, say, the Smoky Mountains and the Appalachians. Yeah. Is that we don't have that, because and I think that's a good point to make. And, you know, I mean, it would be a massive political jump for a game agency in this day and age to institute something like that. And I mean, and I wish you would. But I also realize the limitations of it, and I think it's good for people to understand the macro picture, you know. I mean, it is. I mean, we're a state agency. You know, we're beholden to the customers of the state. Right. So, I mean, that's certainly always going to dictate to a certain extent how we manage, you know, our game species. Yeah. You know, well, I mean, we're never outside of that.
So, but I mean, as far as management goes, as far as the scientific end of it goes, you know, the old expression, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
That's right.
So if we're able to harvest the bears that we need to, under our current framework, and
it's working.
Yeah, if it's
and
working.
I think we're fortunate to be able to hunt them over bait. I mean, there's a lot of places where
I
they
mean,
don't.
You know, that's a perfect example of, whether you necessarily agree with hunting bears over bait or not. We had to have that as a harvest tool.
Yes.
Prior to 2001, all bear harvest in the state for roughly 20 years was basically incidental to deer hunting.
Yeah.
If you were out deer hunting, you saw a bear, you could shoot a bear.
We probably killed less than 50 bears a year in the state.
Well, it was getting on up there towards the 90s as the population grew.
Killed a few more.
And, I mean, more people were seeing them, more bears are out there, you're going to harvest more bears. And we were harvesting, a decent amount of bears up until 2001. And but it was also pretty clear to the agency that by 2001 or by 2000 that our population was growing at a much faster pace than what our harvest rate was.
So
and we knew we had
different.
to slow it down. So we knew we had to increase. And, baiting, whether you agree with baiting or not, I mean, that was one tool that we figured was probably the most palatable to the consumptive and non-consumptive users of the state. And it was certainly probably the most effective tool that we could use.
Yep.
And so, we implemented it in 2001. And, I mean, you can look at our harvest chart and see what an impact it's made from that very first year, and still continues to make a huge impact. So,
Myron, I was on a big national podcast 2 months ago.
Yeah.
And the guy wanted to talk to me. I know you don't listen to podcasts, or I'd tell you who it was. Steve Ranella is the guy. I was on his podcast, and we talked about baiting bears.
Yeah.
And, baiting bears is one of the most selective ways for selective harvest. You're drawing in an animal. You got pictures of him. You know what's there. You can be highly selective.
Absolutely.
In Ranella's response was that, honestly, it's one of the most ethical ways to hunt a bear in terms of shot selection. I mean, if you looked at it and we talked about fair chase and stuff, but from even an ethical standpoint, if ethics is dispatching an animal quickly, then, geez, draw them into bait at 15 yards.
Oh, yeah. There's no doubt about it.
And have them stand still. And so, I mean, there's all these, like, really powerfully positive things, which I'm preaching to the choir talking to these guys about
Which I'm not really that selective because I love bear meat.
So there you go.
As long as I think it is a moderately mature or mature adult male.
You're going to take him.
Yeah. So.
Well, I'm with you. That's good. That's excellent. Well, hey, anything that you'd like to say that we hadn't talked about? This has been really great. Thank you so much for
I wouldn't mind talking about this fall season a little bit.
Yeah.
I get a lot of people asking me all the time, what do I think the fall season is going to be like? Is the quota going to be met? Is it not? And everything. Yeah. And so, that's one thing I always like to kind of, whenever I have a platform, I like to kind of educate people on, especially where it pertains to Arkansas bears and Arkansas bear quotas in zone 1 or something like that, is how closely tied to the mass crop it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it is so closely tied to the mass crop, and you know this because you and I have talked forever about this, but I could actually go back and look at the bear harvest every single year, all the way back to 1980. And I could probably tell you, especially up to 2001, but I could tell you whether or not it was a really good mast year or whether or not it was a really poor mast year. It'd be kind of a little bit tougher to glean out prior to 2001, but from 2001 to this past year, I could look at every year and tell you whether or not it was a good mast year.
So a high bear harvest would mean low mast.
That's correct. And especially if you looked at the timing of the bear harvest.
Okay.
Because, we have harvest records by day, when the season opens. And you could look at how that initial, like the opening day of archery season, roughly 80+% of Arkansas bears every year are harvested with archery equipment. And so I could look at the breakdown of harvest through the duration of archery season, through the duration of muzzleload season, through the duration of gun. And I could tell you, I could get rated on a 1 to 10. Oh, this was probably about an 8 year for mast availability. This was about a 2.
Yeah.
And it is really that directly correlated to mast availability.
Right.
And
because these bears their bellies are full of acorns and they're not responding to bait.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I tell people in my seminars and everything else, you really can't compete with eons of evolution.
Yep.
I mean, these bears evolved eating what Mother Nature provides.
Yeah.
And, the only thing I can equate it to is if you've been fed, filet mignon your whole life and someone sets a piece of burnt chicken down in front of you and said, you need to eat this instead of your filet. I don't know too many people that are going to go over there and eat that chicken.
The only reason you go eat that burnt chicken is if that filet wasn't there.
That's right. That's exactly right.
So when the mast isn't there or is limited.
And, I've had people ask me about projections on this year. And the sad truth about it is it looks like it's going to be a pretty good mast year all the way across the Ozarks, not just at lower or higher elevations.
Okay.
It's pretty good distribution of mast, white oaks and red oaks both. And it was, from what I've seen on the area on my lease and around my lease, it's a good enough year that I didn't even bother with it this year.
Okay. You're not even baiting?
No, I'm not even baiting this year. I mean, it's a lot of work and everything else like that. And, I have guys that come in from out of state and hunt with me. And, I just told them, said, look, guys, it's even more money on their part because they have to buy the non-resident big game. And I said, it's a lot of work and a lot of effort. And I'm afraid we'd all be pretty disappointed by the time opening day rolls around. So.
Yeah.
So I don't expect. I'm
going to suggest that every Arkansas hunter follows what Myron's doing. Just don't even bait this year. Just leave it to us, man. We'll take it from here.
So, but I tell people that, but it's really, it's really kind of what the availability is around their area. I mean, these bears can travel 4, 5, 6 miles, maybe to a bait site. If there's no mast available.
Right.
So, their little micro area of the world may not have any mast. If they're at a high elevation or caught a late frost, it may be a perfect year for them. I tell people, despite what I'm telling you, what I saw where I hunt, you go out and do the homework where you hunt. Take your binoculars out before the season and scout around. See if you've got a bunch of white oaks that are loaded with acorns.
Yeah.
And if you do, your hopes of pulling that bear in after that acorn drop is
tough.
Yeah.
And we've got a late season opener. That
was
major.
Another thing that
just the way the cycle rolls.
The way it rolls this year, it was late. Now, if the season would have opened the 22nd or 23rd like it did last year, I would have probably went ahead and took a gamble.
This is about as late as it'll ever get.
Yes, it is. It'll always
open the fourth Saturday
in September, so concurrent with deer.
It usually runs between the 21st and the 28th or something.
Yeah.
But I've heard mixed reviews that validates what you just said. In that I've got guys that are I've had 2 texts in the last 24 hours with people say, where'd the bears go, Clay? Just like their bears are just gone, and
they will do it that quick.
I've also got guys that are like, man, my baits are getting pounded.
Oh yeah.
And so and they're in different, I think the regional, just small area might differ.
Yeah. I mean, I can't predict what everyone's regional environment, within a 5-mile radius of their bait site. But I can just tell them what I have been told. People I've talked to all across the Ozarks, biologists, technicians, landowners.
A lot of mass crop.
There is a lot of mass this year.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of white oaks specifically.
The way that I deal with this emotionally, Myron, every year is that on years with massive mass crop, man, the bear populations are thriving because of it.
Yeah,
I mean, for real.
Yeah,
I mean, like, you have a year with a bumper crop. You're gonna have sows with big litters. You're gonna have males that are going in the den fat, and so it's kind of like you're buffering for that bad year that you have. I think about that from somebody that loves bears. That's the way you got to think about it. Because if every year we had a terrible mass crop, we wouldn't have any bears.
That's right, we would.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
like that is the way. It may be a really bad year for bow hunters, that have bait sites, but those bow hunters that want to go find those natural food sources, hey, it can be a boom year for them.
Yes.
And the bears it may be bad for me hunting over a barrel, but hey, it's good for the bears. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Years like this, can have lasting impacts a year or 2 years in the future. So it's always good. And certain things, if some of my proposals are, approved by our commission, then, we'll start to see some liberalization of the harvest strategies for sure in Bear Zone 1, probably in Bear Zone 2 in the next, few years. So, we're trying to keep up with the growing times of our bear populations.
Yeah.
So
excellent. Well, I'm grateful that we're in a state that, number one, isn't a referendum state, not to dive too far off of it, but a lot of these states, the game agencies are dictated not by a commission, but by the legislatures
body,
and
yeah.
And
Sure.
so you can get, point being, say what you will about being governed by a commission. These people have wildlife in mind. They're hunters. The general mass population isn't what is making game laws, if I could simply put it that way.
Yeah, or legislators making game laws. I mean,
based upon political stuff.
Right.
And
there's pros and cons to all state systems, whether you're a legislative governed agency or a commission governed agency. But it's been my experience that without a doubt, the commission governed agency is by far and away be the better way to go.
Yeah.
It's certainly a lot more reactive. I mean, you can get things done easier, a lot easier.
Yes.
But I mean, we're still, even though we have a commission, we're still the legislature keeps a close eye. On us, and we still have to have all our appropriations bill and all that stuff approved by the legislature of the state. So, we've been really blessed in Arkansas to, have really good commissioners, and most of them are sportsmen. So they have a real fondness, like every other sportsman in the state, for the resources.
Yeah.
So it's been working really well.
Yeah. Well, man, the Arkansas black bear and now the Oklahoma black bear and the southern Missouri bear and the eastern Mississippi bear and the northern Louisiana bear. Yeah. This region, it's a special place, and it truly is a world-class wildlife resource that we have.
It really is. I tell people all the time, Arkansas is not only, coming back into its own as the bear state, but when bear baiting first took off in 2001, one of the main reasons why we removed the quota, I believe in 2006, was because in spite of having baiting, bear hunting as a sport really didn't start taking off until people learned how to bait.
Yeah.
When people learned how to bait bears, that's when the culture really took off. So in the late 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, that was kind of the coming of age of the Arkansas bear hunters. And that's when people really started learning how to do it. And they thought, man, this is great.
Yeah.
It was a great resource. It was a great tool to have, and people took advantage of it, and they learned on it. And now Arkansas is truly becoming the go-to state to hunt bear in the Southeast.
Yeah.
I mean, I have more and more out-of-state bear hunters call me every year. And
and
really oddly enough, one of their biggest, complaints, not really a complaint, but one of the questions I get all the time, are there any outfitters?
Yeah.
And that is really oddly absent.
Yes.
In Arkansas is the absence of outfitters. And, you and I both know all the issues that come with outfitters. Right. It's hard to gain that much land to have access to. But, and I just tell them, man, just come down and beat the bushes. Kind of like turkey hunting or something in Kansas, go knock on some doors.
Yeah.
And because we do have an absence of outfitters in the state, but in spite of that, we are still becoming the go-to state to hunt bears in the Southeast, and I think it's great.
Yeah,
I love to see it. I love to promote the sport. I just love it. I have a passion about bears and always have, and I'll promote the sport until I retire. So
well. Excellent, man. Thank you, Myron. I really appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure.
Yeah. Hey, I know you've never listened to Bear Hunting Magazine podcast because I showed you how to do.
I'm going to now,
on your phone. But
I feel like I passed a technical milestone today.
Yeah, we just got to figure out how to get podcasts on an Android. But no, this is what we always say at the end of the podcast. We say, keep the wild places wild because that's where the bears live.
That's right. Thank you very much.
Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. Meat Eater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the engineer's going to be there. Meat Eater Live headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay? Every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Arts Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24th, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.